What's up guys, it's Paraly5er here. Today we're going to be ranking all of the tier 3 armor sets in Grounded 1.4, starting with Antlion armor. Now, this is a medium tier 3 set of armor that requires you to kill quite a lot of antlions, but it can be obtained in the lower yard. It's pretty easy to get, even though it does require a lot of antlion parts. The piece effect for this is sizzle protection. This is going to protect you from sizzle damage. When you have all 3 pieces equipped, you're going to really struggle to sizzle to death. Unless you are on woe. However, the big problem with this is once you get to New Game Plus now, there's a sizzle immunity effect that you can get on trinkets, which renders the Antlion armor completely useless. The sleek effect on this armor is thirst rate. It makes you thirsty less often. Again, useless, especially in New Game Plus, when hunger and thirst is basically down at like a 10% drain, even lower depending on how high you're at in New Game Plus. The set bonus is quick draw, which makes it so that bow and crossbow reload speed is increased by 40% for 3 seconds when attacking with ranged weapons. It also reduces the effect of the rough reload on the crossbows to 1.5 seconds, down from 2.3. Now I am going to put this in B tier. It's a useful set of armor, it has a good use. Until you get to New Game Plus, then it's useless. It's easy to obtain, you can get it in the lower yard, and it's the earliest tier 3 set of armor, I would argue, that you can get, which makes it very good. However, once you get to New Game Plus, you're probably never going to use this armor again, as all 3 of its effects aren't great. The set bonus is probably the best effect of the 3, and I still wouldn't recommend using it, as there's plenty of other armor sets that are better for ranged classes. So I'm putting it in B tier. Next, we have the Assassin's armor. Now, this is obtained by defeating the Mantis, making it a pretty difficult one to obtain and costs some pretty hefty resources like Pond Moss, which can be difficult to get and usually requires a tier 3 dagger, meaning you'll have to defeat a Widow. This is a light set of armor, meaning for defense, it is not very good. But that's not where it excels in the offense area. The piece effect for this armor is Cutman, which means that critical hits have a 50% chance to inflict bleed, dealing 20 damage a second for 10 seconds, or 200 damage total over that 10-second course, which is a very strong effect if you have a good crit chance, or even if you just have a single piece of this armor, I think it is worth having. Having the full set is kind of not worth it, just for this effect alone. The sleek effect on this armor is crit stun, which makes it so that when you do hit a crit, you have a 30% chance to deal 25 stun. Now, 25 stun is a lot of stun, but a 30% chance is not great. If you want this effect to be effective, you're going to have to run the full set here, which gives you a much higher chance of 70-ish% that you're going to stun the enemy upon critting them. Finally, the set bonus for this armor is critical chain, which makes it so that performing a critical hit increases the chance of performing another by 2.5% for 10 seconds. This is a good effect. However, it does force you to run the full set if you want this effect, and because the full set is light armor, when you get to the higher New Game Pluses, you can't really do this, as you're just going to get one hit by everything, so it's not really a viable option. I would say this armor is a solid A tier. I'd say you can't run the full set, it's not a good idea. However, running a single piece is definitely a really good idea in the mid to late game of Grounded, especially once you get into New Game Plus. For the first couple of New Game Pluses, you can risk that lower defense in order to get this extra damage in. It is a very useful piece of armor for that reason. I would not recommend you use the chestplate though. I'd recommend you use either helmet or leggings, since those two provide the least defense, and I personally would upgrade it down the bulky path, because the extra stun from the sleek path isn't necessarily worth it. So I personally would use either helmet or leggings down the bulky path. Next, we have the Black Ox armor. This is a medium set of armor and does require a lot of Black Ox parts to craft, which can be really annoying to obtain early on into the upper yard. However, once you get later into the upper yard and you start farming Black Oxes, you're going to get these pretty commonly. The piece effect for this armor is called Overbearing, and it makes it so performing a charged attack has a 33% chance to lower the damage of enemy attacks by 20% for 15 seconds. This is a pretty good piece effect, except the fact it forces you to use charged attacks. I would argue that Blade Master, the mutation, is better because it reduces the enemy attack while just using a sword. This one forces you to do charged attacks, but it does apply for 15 seconds, although it's only a 30% chance. For this to even be useful, you'd have to probably run a full set of Black Ox armor. You couldn't just run a single piece, because then you'd have to average out on 3 charged attacks just to reduce the enemy's attack, and charged attacks in general in Grounded just aren't really a viable method, in my opinion. The sleek effect is quick charge, of course, which makes it so that attacks charge 12% quicker. If you run the full set, it's 36% total. This does stack with the piece effect, which I can appreciate, which is a very good stacking effect. And it basically means you're going to do really quick charged attacks, and those charge attacks that you do are going to reduce the enemy's damage, which is really good because if you're doing a charge attack, you're probably going to get hit quite a lot. And then finally, the full set bonus for this is called Stunning Charger, and it increases the stun of charge attacks by 25. So I appreciate that this whole armor set is revolving around charged attacks. It's very cohesive in that sense. However, charged attacks in Grounded really aren't that good, especially on solo. If you're playing multiplayer, I can kind of understand how this might be a viable option. But in solo, this armor just isn't really a choice because you're just going to get hit by the enemies. 90% of the time, you won't be able to get the charge attack off before you get hit. So for that reason, I'm putting this in C tier. The next set of armor is the Fire Ant armor. This is a medium set of armor and requires you to kill a bunch of fire ants and get some lint rope to make. It is a pretty cheap armor set to make. Its piece effect is corrosion. It makes it so melee attacks have a 10% chance to debuff the enemy with acid, causing them to take 15% more damage for 10 seconds. It's a pretty low chance per piece, but if you're using a weapon and you're swinging a lot, this does last for 10 seconds, like I said, so chances are you can get it to proc enough that the enemy will constantly have this debuff, especially on higher health enemies. For the sleek effect, you're going to have acid damage increase, which increases player dealt acid damage by 10%. Now, there are very few sources of acid damage in this game, one of them being the set bonus for this armor, which is Acidic Splash, which makes it so melee attacks have a 10% chance to launch an additional acidic splash that'll deal 25 extra damage. It can hit targets from any distance and ignores all defense resistances. However, the acid set bonus isn't that good, so I wouldn't recommend running a set of Fire Ant armor, especially because it's medium. It's good on the defensive side, but on the really high new game pluses, it's not quite enough. However, I would say the piece effect on this is really good, and you can run a single piece. I am going to put it in S tier. The reason I put it above Assassin is because I find percentage debuffs are much better than like a bleed debuff, which is always the same amount of damage. It's also much cheaper and easier to craft, as you don't have to kill a boss in order to get it. So for that reason, Fire Ant armor is S tier. You can run the full set, especially against the IBM. However, me personally, I usually only run one piece. Again, either a helmet or leggings, because it's a medium set of armor. You should always save a heavy piece for your chestplate, as that one provides the most protection. So we're going to go into helmet or leggings for the Fire Ant. Next, we have the Fire Strategist's armor. To get this one, you need to kill the Fire Ant Queen by poisoning her, which makes it pretty easy to get, but you're not guaranteed to get it prior to New Game Plus, which is worth taking into account if you decide to befriend the Ant Queen. It is a medium armor like all of the other summoner armors, and it has a couple of effects. The piece effect is Summon Crit, which increases friendly summons crit hit chance by 15%. This is pretty crazy, because if you have all three pieces, that's like a 45% boost to crit chance, which is huge because, like, that means they're basically critting every other hit. Pretty powerful stuff if you get a good summon. The sleek effect for this is Summon Crit Acid Splash, which makes it so friendly summons critical hits fire an additional Acid Splash projectile, dealing 25 burning damage. Now, we know the acid ignores all of the resistances to the enemies, and because your summons have a 45% crit chance, this is going to happen pretty often if you have a lot of summons. This seems like a pretty good combination of armor abilities. Finally, we have the Fire Ant Commander, which is the set bonus, and this makes it so attacks have a 10% chance to spawn a Fire Soldier Ant, dying after 12 seconds. Now, this armor set on paper sounds really, really good. The Fire Soldier Ants and any of your summons can be infused, and if you're running a summoner build, it can be really good. You do, however, have to run the full set for this to be really useful whatsoever. If you don't run the full set, it's just not going to be enough, and you probably want to run this in multiplayer. I think it's a hard one to run in solo because you want someone else distracting the enemy while you summon all your summons. So for that reason, I'm going to put this armor in... I'm going to put it in B tier. I do think it can be very, very useful, although I think it's another one of those ones that is much better in multiplayer than it is in single player. Next, we have the Moldy Matriarch armor. Now, this armor only works with a singular weapon, pretty much, which is the Moldy Matriarch bomb, which is a huge downside. It is a heavy armor set, and to get it, you need to kill the hardest enemy in the game, the infected Broodmother. Keep that in mind, this is very difficult to get your hands on. For the piece effect, it's called Big Boom, and it makes it so explosive attacks have a chance to provide a stacking 5% crit damage buff. Stacks 20 times before stopping, resets when combat ends. This means if you're in a long-term fight, it's going to stack up to double crit damage when you're critting your enemies, which is pretty good. The sleek effect on this armor is Dynamite, which makes it so explosive attacks have a 20% chance to lower the target's explosive resistance by 20% for 10 seconds. Again, a pretty useful thing, especially if you're using the full armor set. It's going to reduce that enemy's resistance to explosives. And then finally, the set bonus is called Cluster Bomb. Makes it so all bomb weapons have a 10% chance to cause additional explosives that deal 70 explosive damage. Now, there is a huge issue with this armor, and it's the one I already mentioned. It only works with the Blaster of the Multi-Matriarch. You have to run the full loadout for it to be viable, which means you're just screwed. I'm going to personally put this armor in D tier. It's extremely difficult to get your hands on. You have to kill the IBM multiple times, which is the hardest boss in the game. It only works with a single weapon, which is the Blaster of the Multi-Matriarch. You could use it with bombs, technically, yes, but these aren't renewable. The only thing with durability that it works with is the Blaster of the Multi-Matriarch, which is just not a good weapon, especially in the higher New Game Pluses. It doesn't provide any elemental damage. It's extremely hard to use because the bombs just go everywhere, and I would not recommend this weapon in the slightest. I wouldn't recommend this armor in the slightest. It's just not something that is worth using, and that is just my opinion, like always, but I just don't like it. I think it works against very few enemies because a lot of the enemies are either resistant to explosives, or you have the Wasp Queen, who quite literally flies, so you can't hit her with explosives, or you have the IBM, who heals from explosives, so you can only really use this against the Mantis or the Broodmother. The Broodmother's already really easy. The Mantis, you might as well just use something else. Like, it's really not worth using. It's not worth your time, and for that reason, it is a D tier set of armor. It is the only one so far that I've put in D tier. Next up, we have the Moth armor. Now, this is a very interesting set of armor. It's a light set of armor, and it requires you to kill quite a few moths in order to make it, making it quite expensive. In terms of a piece effect, we have Ranged Cut, which makes it so ranged weapons have a 30% chance to inflict the bleed effect, which deals 20 damage for 5 seconds. Quite a powerful bleed effect, not quite as powerful as the Assassin Armor's bleed effect, but still good nonetheless, especially because you don't have to land a crit, you just have to keep landing shots with whatever ranged weapon you're using. For the sneak effect, we have Jumpstart, which makes it so ranged attacks have a 15% chance to refund 15 stamina. This is just not good, in my opinion. I would just run it bulky, because I don't think this effect is very useful. 5% is too low, and 15 stamina is practically nothing. Then finally, the set effect is called Windrun, which makes it so ranged attacks have a 25% chance to increase the player's movement speed by 20% for 10 seconds. Again, useless effect, because if you enter combat, you lose all of your buffs from like Natural Explorer and all your speed buffs like that, so you're just giving up speed buffs in order to gain one temporary speed buff. Not worth it at all. I would say you don't want to run a set of this. You don't want to run it sleek, so I would run it bulky and maybe only run 1 to 2 pieces. Run it with the Marksman's Cap, obviously, is what you should be doing. So yeah, I would say this armor is decent for ranged. I'm going to put it in B tier, but it's not perfect, and it's one of the only ranged choices you really have, so it can't be any lower. But if you are a ranged player, it's good. I wouldn't recommend using this in solo. Again, solo, you're pretty much forced to use melee. I wouldn't use summoner or ranged because it's just going to make your life much, much harder. Up next, we have the Mother Demon armor. In order to make this, you need to kill the Broodmother. Pretty simple stuff. This is also a heavy armor, which makes it so it provides a lot of defense. In terms of abilities, the piece effect is Poison Coating, makes it so all attacks have a 25% chance to apply a poison effect, which deals 16 damage every 5 seconds over 30 seconds. So 16 times 6 is 96 damage in 30 seconds. It's not a lot of damage over time, but it can be increased with different abilities like Spider Armor, which boosts poison damage. For the bulky effect, you have Venom Coating, which makes all your attacks have a 25% chance to inflict venom to enemies, which deals 18 damage every 5 seconds for 30 seconds. 18 times 6 is going to be 108 damage in total, which is again a little bit more than the poison damage. When you combine the two of them together, you're getting a nearly 200 damage in total, which is about the same as the Assassin Armor. Except the Assassin Armor does that in 10 seconds, whereas the Mother Demon Armor does that in 30 seconds, so nowhere near as quick. For the set bonus, we have Poison Nova, which makes it so when you hit a creature, it has a 10% chance to release a poison explosion that affects all creatures engulfed in it. It deals 30 damage every 5 seconds for 25 seconds, so that is 30 times 5, 150 damage in total. I would say this armor is one of my favorites. It's definitely S tier. You can run the full set, But me personally, I'm not a fan of running the full set of this. I prefer to run just the chest plate because it's a heavy armor set. You want a heavy piece on your chest at all times. So if you're not running a roly chest plate, then definitely run a Mother Demon chest plate as this thing is heavy. Always run it sleek for the additional venom effect. The damage over time from this armor is really, really nice, and it is one of my favorite armor sets in the game, so for that reason, it's going in S tier. Next, we have the roly-poly armor, a heavy set of armor. This armor has the highest defense in the game, alongside the Mother Demon and the Moldy Matriarch armor, and has some interesting effects. The peace effect is called block stun, makes it so that it increases the enemy's stun by 3 every time you block an attack. Against enemies that have a lot of attacks, this can stack pretty quickly, like against a wolf spider that has a lot of quick, fast attacks. You're going to block them all or parry them all, then it's going to increase their stun pretty significantly over time. The sleek effect on this armor is block gauge, which increases it by 50, which is quite literally less than the Ladybug armor does, which makes no sense. I don't know why it's like that, but it is. And finally, the set bonus for this increases creatures' aggression towards you by 50%. This is only really good in multiplayer if you're trying to get your friends not to get hit, so everything attacks you instead. Definitely not good in single player, as instead of the enemies fighting each other, they will target you more. So, for that reason, this armor is very, very good. I'm actually going to move it up to A tier. I think last time I maybe had it in a B or a C. This is an A tier set of armor, for one reason and one reason only. High defense. Now that New Game Plus has been added, things are a lot tougher, so you need a lot more defense. Personally, I have been running roly-poly chest plate down the bulky path as my main chest plate, with a Mother Demon helmet down the sleek path for really high defense, and then a pair of fire ant leggings down the bulky path for even more defense. Because you really do need a lot of defense in New Game Plus, and the roly-poly armor provides the absolute most. The reason I use it over a Mother Demon piece down the bulky route is just to get a little bit of a different effect in there, because I find my poison and venom almost always procs with that 25% chance on the Mother Demon, so I might as well run roly chest plate to increase my stun against enemies, so I can stun them more often, especially those enemies that attack very frequently, like wolf spiders. So for that reason, this armor is now in A tier. If they do happen to nerf a bunch of stuff to make New Game Plus easier, then I would say this armor wouldn't be as necessary as it currently is, because currently everything obliterates you. Up next, we have the Wasp armor. This is a light set of armor, meaning you're going to be really vulnerable if you choose to wear this. In order to get this one, you're going to need to kill a bunch of wasps, some of the most dangerous enemies in the upper yard. For the peace effect for this, it's called Charge Shot Combo. It makes it so that uncharged bow attacks have a 30% chance to apply a 5-second buff that reduces the charged attack time of all sources by 25%. Now, it's very hard to tell when you do charged or uncharged bow attacks. There's no meter that tells you how charged your bow attack is. So it's very hard to know if this effect procs apart from in the bottom left of your screen. And reducing the charge time and all these numbers, it's just very confusing. It's a hard metric to keep track of, especially with a bow. When it comes to the sleek effect, we have Quick Shot Refund, which makes it so charged bow shots have a 30% chance to give a buff for 5 seconds that makes uncharged bow shots refund 30 stamina per hit. So you're supposed to do an uncharged shot to reduce the time of charging your shots, to then do a charged shot to make it so that you get another buff, which makes it so your uncharged shot now gives you stamina for the hit, and then you can repeat the cycle, I guess, to not lose stamina. It's really confusing, this set of armor, and it basically is just a way for you to keep stamina without doing any additional damage, any additional effects, or anything at all. It's just stupid. And then the set bonus is Air Superiority, which makes it so uncharged shots have a 75% chance to deal 30 extra stun. So the purpose of this armor is you alternate between uncharged and charged shots while watching your effects in the bottom left the whole time to make sure you get the right effect. And then once it starts working, you'll keep regaining stamina and inflicting stun upon the enemies. I guess this could be useful on multiplayer for stunning things out of the sky, but it would be so complicated, and it's such a weird one, and you have to run the full set for it to be any good. For me, Wasp armor is D tier. I would never, ever, ever use this armor set. I think Moth armor is much more superior, and I just think it's just bad, okay? It's a really bad set. It's horrendous. Up next, we have the Widow armor. Now, this set of armor is a light set of armor, making you very vulnerable if you wear the full set. And to get it, you're going to need to kill Black Widows, some of the hardest enemies in the game. The peace effect for this armor is increased poison damage, which makes it so each melee hit has a 25% chance to increase the damage of player dealt poison by 30%. This doesn't stack with each armor piece, it only applies the effect once. This is pretty useful for increasing your poison damage and can be used in combination with the Mother Demon armor. The sleek effect of this armor is parry poison, which makes it so when you parry an attack, it has a 20% chance to poison the target, which deals 15 damage every 5 seconds for 30 seconds. 15 times 6 is 90 damage in total. Not quite as powerful as the poison or venom from the Mother Demon armor. Then finally, the set bonus for Widow armor is Death's Impetus, which makes it so killing foes increases the player's attack speed by 15% and gives regeneration of 15 health a second for 10 seconds. This can be really good if you're killing a lot of enemies, for example in the final defense. However, the biggest problem with this is that when you're in higher new game pluses, having a full set of light armor like this makes you extremely vulnerable. You're going to be regenerating health quickly because of the set bonus, but you're going to be taking so much damage that you might actually just get one shot by most enemies, and I don't think this armor set is great in general. It's a pain to get. I'm going to put it in C tier. I don't think this armor is that good. I personally wouldn't choose to run it. I think Assassin and Fire Ant both have better abilities. I think the Mother Demon has better abilities and it's heavier, so it has more defense. And I think Widow Armor's set bonus isn't quite good enough for me to want to run it. So I'm putting it in C tier. It's also very hard to get because you have to kill Widows to get it. I don't rate this armor as much as I used to. Moving on to the single pieces of armor now, we have the Bard's Tutor, which is a light piece of armor that you get from killing the Wasp Queen. So pretty difficult to craft, but is it worth it? The piece effect on the Bard's Tutor is Bardic Discouragement, which gives charged bow attacks a 25% chance to debuff nearby enemies, reducing their attack damage by 20% for 10 seconds. It also gives a 10% chance to debuff nearby enemies, increasing the amount of damage they take by 20% for 10 seconds, but only one of the abilities can be active at any one time. Both of these abilities, however, are very, very good, very useful. It is a shame you can't really choose which ability to get, but in multiplayer this can be very useful for either reducing the damage you take or increasing the damage the enemy takes. One or the other consecutively throughout the fight are both very good effects to have. The secondary effect of this helmet is Waspoid, which makes wasps and wasp drones ignore the player. They are neutral to the player, but it makes bees attack the player. Although bees do attack the player by the picnic table, they don't usually attack them anywhere else, but it's very rare that you come across a bee anywhere else. This is a pretty useful effect if you're trying to avoid fighting wasps, however, I've never found myself using it personally. The sleek effect for this hat is Healthy Harmony, which gives charged bow shots a 50% chance to bleed nearby creatures, dealing 5 damage a second for 10 seconds. It also gives Bardic Inspiration, an additional healing buff that it can apply, which heals 5 health every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. This is a very, very good ability. You definitely want to have this helmet down the sleek path for this additional ability, and it actually makes this whole piece of armor extremely strong and very, very good for ranged players. I'm going to put it in the A tier. It's between this and the Marksman's Cap. Both are extremely strong for a ranged build. However, I do think that this one would be better. It is a very, very good piece of armor, and I would highly recommend you use it if you like ranged builds. The reason it's not quite S is because I think doing charged bow attacks is very difficult in a single player environment. I think that it is much more effective in a multiplayer environment, but when you are in multiplayer, this thing absolutely slaps, and using a ranged player with this is a very good strategy. Next up, we have the Fluffy Pupa Hat, which is a medium piece of armor. This piece of armor is going to increase the amount of grass planks and weed stems that can be carried at once by 5, which is not that many, and a bit of a bummer. For the sleek effect, it's going to reduce your exhaustion recovery by 50%, which is very, very high. However, this is typically used for cutting down grass. It's not really a helmet that you would do anything else with. It's for building. I would say this is C tier. It's really not that useful. The increase of 5 on the carry capacity isn't really needed with Hauling Hero and the Intern badge, or just Hauling Hero even is more than enough. We also have the Handy Nat in New Game Plus that can carry 25, and you can use that easily. So I would say this isn't really a necessary helmet to wear. So for that reason, it's C tier. It's just not really worth it. Up next, we have the Wizard Hat, which is a piece of light armor. You get this one by killing the Termite King and then crafting it with his carapaces. And the effect of this helmet is that it has Wizard's Defense, which makes it so attacking with ranged weapons has a 50% chance to increase the perfect block timing when using a candy staff by 30 milliseconds for 10 seconds. This isn't quite as high of an increase as the Koi armor. It's 2/3 of the Koi armor increase, but it is still a decently sizable increase, and you get it just for attacking with ranged weapons, so this is pretty useful. When you upgrade it down the sleek path, you get Wizard's Duel, which makes it so perfect blocking increases the damage of your staves by 40% for 10 seconds, which is a very useful effect. Although perfect blocking with staves is difficult because you can't cancel right after an attack, there's a bit of a delay there. I would say this is very useful, especially on multiplayer. You could run in, get some parries to get that buff, and then run away, get your teammate to distract the enemy, and then you can get some shots off with that increased damage. It's going to be very, very useful, especially when you do a charged attack. It is going to do a lot of damage and be very, very powerful in that situation. So for that reason, I am going to put the Wizard's Hat in B. I don't think it's quite as powerful as the Bard's Tutor. However, I do think it is viable for if you want to run a staff build or a mage build. So for that reason, it goes in the B tier. And then finally, the last piece of tier 3 armor we have is the Termite armor. Now, this is a light piece of armor, and unfortunately, it was massively nerfed in 1.4. The nerf that they made to this armor is it no longer stacks effects with the Giddy Goop, making it nowhere near as good as it used to be. The piece effect for this is Dust Guard, which provides immunity to any slowness attacks from the dust clouds from the termite soldiers, moths, and dust mites. This isn't a great effect, but it can be kinda useful, especially in that final defense. However, I'd prefer an Empanadust for this. The sleek effect, however, is Dust Cloud, which makes it when you hit a creature, you have a 10% chance to emit a cloud of dust that reduces enemy movement speed by 25% and attack speed by 20%, and fires an acidic splash that does 5 damage. Now, this is pretty useful. It's a good piece of armor, but it was way better when it's stacked with the Giddy Goop. I'm going to put it in B tier. It's definitely still a viable option. However, it is light and it is a chest plate, which means, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to take a lot of damage if you're using this because the chest plate is where the most defense comes from. So using a light chest plate makes you very vulnerable, especially in the higher new game pluses. Slowing enemies down can actually make it harder to perfect block sometimes because you aren't used to their attack patterns being so slow. However, if you like it being really slow, this is really, really useful. It makes the game much easier, especially against really fast enemies like the IBM. So for that reason, it is a B tier piece of armor. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your opinions and where you would have ranked these armors in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like on it, and I'll see you in the next Grounded video. Have a great rest of your day.